back to BetterHelp's In Session series. I'm Hesu Jo, a licensed therapist and part of the clinical operations team here at BetterHelp. Today, we are excited to be joined by John Kim, aka The Angry Therapist, and Vanessa Bennett, who are not only licensed therapists and relationship coaches, but master plate spinners. Writing books, hosting podcasts, creating mental health content, and raising their toddler are just a few of those spinning plates. Before their worlds collided, they each experienced the painful expiration of long-term relationships, which thrust them onto their inner journeys, personal therapy, therapy school, and helping thousands of people relationship better. As a couple, they're committed to being transparent about their baggage and the slippery knots of their own imperfect relationship to help illuminate the surprising issues that hinder all of us from finding, enjoying, and sustaining love. Vanessa and John, thank you so much for being part of our In Session series. Great to see you again, as we have met before. We're super excited to have you here. Wondering if to get us started, could you tell us maybe a little bit more about yourselves and how you've gotten to where you are today?
I've never been called a master plate spinner before, so thank you for that. My whole story starts with the divorce when I was 35. Going back to grad school, becoming a therapist, and then my journey on becoming a therapist was it was difficult for me because it felt very contrived. And so I kind of hopped the fence. I started working in unconventional ways, as they say, and I started blogging. So it's been 10 years of me meeting people at the coffee shop and doing walks around lakes, getting on social media, all of that. And so for me, it's always been trying to humanize the therapist. And I continue to write books and do all this stuff. So
getting out of the office and into life.
Yeah, no office, no slacks. Yeah, getting out of the office and into life.
I also like to remind him often that it's been longer than 10 years now. You've been saying 10 years since I met you, so I think you're closer to 15.
Yeah, maybe 15 years. She always reminds me how old I am.
To remind him of that. Yeah, I mean, my therapy journey, or just my journey to kind of where I'm at, I guess, started with my own personal therapy, as I think a lot of therapists, it does. And just having some unbelievably transformative experiences that really kind of thrust me onto my own self-betterment path. And for me, that's kind of like the way of the seeker. And so I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. It was like, I took my yoga teacher training. I did a yoga therapy training. I did a nutrition training. Like, I kind of did all of the things before I found my way into my grad program. And specifically, I went for depth psychology. So I really took more of like the Jungian spiritual path, right? So they call depth psychology the psychology of the soul. And honestly, I think it was through my collision with John, after I had kind of ended a relationship, packed my bags, moved across the country from New York to LA. He really opened my eyes to this like other way of being a therapist, which didn't mean that I had to be in an office all day, seeing 30 plus patients a week. I kind of knew from the beginning that wasn't my calling. I'm pretty extroverted, so being in a room with one person all day is tough for me, but running groups feels amazing, and doing more of the media stuff feels really good. And it feels like I have found my way into, I guess, more of my calling, while also seeing clients, kind of mixing it up, right? Basically creating, I think, for both of us, like what makes the most sense for us.
Yeah, this us thing has come up a lot in what you've said, and you've already kind of elaborated a little bit into your clinical background. And now I am curious about how your different approaches, your different therapy styles, how have you been able to have these come together, not only as professional working business partners, but as people that are together raising a family?
Yeah, I mean, the book, It's Not Me, It's You, it's all about proving that therapists are also human and have issues. So this is the first time being in a relationship with another therapist. And it's been, it's great because, of course, she has a lot of tools and has done a lot of work, but also challenging because she can now call me out on my own shit, So it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah. And I think that John and my differences in the way that we kind of approach therapy, our different trainings, our backgrounds, complement each other in a lot of ways, and then challenge each other in a lot of ways. But I think the beauty in being a therapist, in a relationship with a therapist, is that we see challenge as a good thing, as a welcome thing, as like I get excited by challenge, And so we like to say I'm more of the wine glass, he's more of the shot glass when it comes to our approaches, right? Because he's a little bit more behavioral, cognitive, what he calls like street level. And then I tend to go more depth, right? So kind of more soul, spiritual, the unconscious, the collective, stuff like that.
Yeah. I like this nod to the shot class thing, because I know that John, you have a podcast called Therapy in a Shot Glass. And Vanessa, I know you host your own too. Can you elaborate a little bit about those different shows? What comes up there for both of you?
Yeah, mine's more of a documentation. It's a captain's log of my journey. And, it's 10, 15 minutes, 3 times a week, and sometimes guests. But it's like a very pure, raw look at my inner journey as a Korean man going through life, having a child, being in relationships, all of that stuff. So it's one of my favorite things to do is my podcast. And I kind of do them from everywhere, usually sweaty, behind a dumpster, on the toilet, all that. That's just my thing. Vanessa's is very different. Vanessa's is more polished and longer.
So mine is with my best friend from grad school, business partner. We went to a school in Santa Barbara, so it was always like an hour and a half drive to and from. And so we would have these long, depth spiritual pontification about the universe and the way things work kind of conversations. And we just knew that we weren't the only ones that were thinking this way and having these conversations. And so we wanted to kind of, as therapists, bring these conversations to people so that they understood also that therapists, we have these kind of conversations and this is what it looks like outside the therapy room. And so a lot of times, we switch it up. We have guests, but also our guests can be astrologers or, people who are more clinical or people, it's kind of all over the place. We also do live coaching sessions as well. So people that are, dealing with things in real time and challenges. And then we also just answer questions from guests or from viewers or listeners and things like that too.
Great. You're really covering a wide breadth of
things.
different kinds of topics, people, perspective, insight, and always appreciative to therapists that are out there using the platform to be vulnerable and kind of talk about this human side. You said bringing humanity back to who we are. You also said something about like therapists have issues. I don't know if you said that, but I definitely heard that. And I can feel that. Yes. So I want to go back to something, like you as separate people, a separate therapist found each other. And, this is coming after what sounds like difficult relationships for both of you. Something inside of you decided like, I'm going to try this with this person. I think some therapists might say like, maybe I have some kind of improved insight or better understanding of myself in a way to know I'm ready for a relationship. But for those people out there that are not therapists, which I think is most people out there, what would you say in terms of how to know that one is ready for a relationship? How are we supposed to attune to that and figure out if I'm ready? We hear a lot of like stuff out there of you really got to work on yourself before you're prepared to enter this thing. But how do I know that I've worked on myself enough?
Yeah, my answer would be you don't. I actually don't like the am I ready? We also do it with kids. Am I ready to have kids? You're never going to be ready to have kids, And so I think with relationships, because we never know when we're going to meet someone, whether it's via app or at the grocery store, you don't know when that collision is going to happen. So I think you're always on the road to having a better relationship with yourself. And when you meet someone that you want to invest in, it's go time. There is no like, I have to cross these boxes or line up these ducks for me to be ready. That being said, I do think that if you're coming out of a relationship, you shouldn't jump into one the next day. So I do think there is, because I think growth can calcify. And I think there is a window where the growth soil is very rich. And it's usually after a breakup, after the feelings, when you have time to revisit the black box to see how the plane went down. And then you start having some revelations inside. And this is a really important piece because this is where you start to hopefully take some ownership and change. So when you meet someone, you're going to give yourself a different love experience, right? By changing yourself, which is 50 part of the equation. So yes, you're never really ready. You're always working on your relationship with self, but at the same time, don't jump into something instantly after a relationship is over.
I'm seeing a poster behind you, and I know that's one of the books that you've written, Single on Purpose. And I can't help but wonder and guess, like, is what you're talking about here expanded on in that book?
Yes, that's exactly what it is. And it doesn't say single forever.
Right.
It says single on purpose, find yourself first. So that's the window after a breakup or expired relationship where you get a chance to find yourself first before you meet someone else. And that's the ticking clock, is you're going to meet someone. You don't know when, so get on it,
Yeah.
A lot of people miss that step, meet someone else, and it's, I think, harder to grow in relationship than it is when you're alone, because when you're alone, you have, free time and you have, you're not 50% of something that's greater than self.
Yeah. And I think
Mhm.
it depends on the kind of growth, right? Like, because we are relational creatures, there's a lot of, I think what you're saying is so spot on. Like, it's such a rich moment to do that inner work and to really learn about yourself and what was my part in the relationship, right? Like, how can I own my 100%, which we're always looking to own our 100% in every dynamic, right? And then once you have that understanding, then you get to kind of put it into practice. Because we're relational creatures, we learn about ourselves in the mirror of the other person, right? It's like we need to be reflected back to us by them. And so then you get an opportunity to take that stuff and put it into practice. And then guess what? We're onions. So like the number of clients I get that are like, I thought I did this work. I thought I worked through this. I thought I solved this problem. And I'm like, yeah, that's not how it works, right? Because now you're with a different person who triggers you in a different way and activates a different response. And so again, it's going back to what I was saying in the beginning about reframing the way we look at activation and challenge as exciting opportunity for continued growth versus something we're trying to avoid, right? I think that's really important when we think about going into relationships. No, we're never ready, to your point. And can we look at challenge as excitement? I think that's helpful for all of us.
Sounds like it would be a very good tip for somebody who, for example, is coming out of a relationship to look at challenges as something exciting, as an opportunity. But I think a lot of people, including myself, and I imagine both of you, have had experience of, am I ever going to get over this? Like once you come out of a relationship, whether it was a toxic breakup or what we like to call an amicable one, if that is a real thing. How does one move on from a breakup? Like, what are some of the steps? Is there a proper order of steps? Is there something that you would suggest?
Yeah, I my next book is all about this, breaking through your breakup, and just broad strokes. I think there are some steps. Of course, everyone has a different formula, and it's customizable. But I think step one is to know that the relationship has expired, meaning the acceptance piece, right? So you're not wondering and playing back if I just did this or if they just did that, because then that, yeah, and then without that acceptance, now you're in your head and you're drowning. So getting to a place where you completely accept that this relationship has expired, and there's something about that because that is, I know people have a problem with because, like to compare love to milk. But for me, and it comes from my own story, I really had to use the word expiration because then I feel like, oh, it wasn't meant to go anymore. It wasn't meant to last any longer or this is the unfolding of it. That reframe gave me a lot of peace and not wanting to pick up the phone again, right? Or instigate around to. And then I think it's grieving. And so, all the stages, like when you lose someone, pain, denial, anger, jealousy, all of that in different orders. And then I think you go through stage 3, which is when you're ready, examining the black box. That's what I call it. And so taking the expiration as an opportunity to learn and possibly redefine instead of just being angry and resentful. And there's a tipping point there when you start to take away and learn from it, that then now you're appreciative of that relationship instead of just angry. I think the final piece is bringing more to the table to the next relationship by working on your relationship with self, and that's ongoing.
Yeah. The one piece too that I would kind of jumping off of that would be this idea that we have to get over it. Like this idea of like, when am I over it? Like I got to get over it. Right. And I hate that term and that word because I don't believe there's any such thing, right? It's like you move through something, you integrate something, you make meaning of something. And then once you've maybe made meaning of it, then you're better able to kind of move forward. But I don't think we want to actually get over something, because then we're skipping out on what John is saying, which is like the examining of the black box. What's my 100%? How can I be a better person going into my next relationship? And so a lot of us feel like we got to force ourselves to get over. And I just want to call out, like, that's really not the goal, right, of any of this.
Yeah. And when you say get over, there's something minimizing about
the pain.
Yeah, it's, we don't go into relationships with bad intentions.
Yeah.
We open our hearts and we want to do the best we can. We trust and we want to build something. We're honest, and it doesn't work out. But it strips that intention of two people opening up, sharing stories and themselves. So when
Yeah.
you say get over it, it's like, oh, it almost sounds like you want to rip out that chapter, which I think is minimizing to
Yeah.
that human exchange of two people wanting to love each other.
Well, I also think too, and you and I have talked a lot about this, like the idea of getting over also doesn't allow for the very real truth that many of us can then be in beautiful, healthy, loving relationships and still sometimes think about that person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And still sometimes, remember them fondly or reminisce or whatever words
Or
you
even
want
be
to
friends.
use,
You
or
could
even be friends, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm good friends with my college boyfriend who,
Yeah.
I used to say was like the love of my life. It was that first big imprint of love. And so, yeah, I think you're right, John. It's like it minimizes that sometimes those relationships do last in their own way and they are a part of us and we don't want to rip that out. We want that to stay a part of us. Even the ones that were bad, air quotes, bad, they're a part of us and they should stay that way.
Wait a minute, you're still friends with an ex?
You saw it here, folks. I'm glad that you're calling out the somewhat problematic nature of that phrase or the idea that we're supposed to get over something, because I myself have communicated to my clients and now largely to myself. We emphasize the importance of positive self-talk, and a lot of people aren't always sure what that is. So to illustrate, it's like, well, think about the way that somebody that deeply cares about you speaks to you, or the way that you speak to someone that you deeply care about, admire, respect. Would you tell someone that you very much respect, love, care about, just get over it, and it'll be it. Just get over it. Because we tend to say that to ourselves, but it's not very kind to just say, get over it. It's something about it, as you said, like doesn't feel correct. It's not like the loving kindness approach to getting through something to the other side of it, which, like you said, like it's not about ripping out the reality of what happened in the past. It's about learning to, accept, live with this piece of who the truth of you are. It's all makeup of where we are today, who we are, all these things. I kind of want to ask more about the black box thing.
Yes.
I think, for folks that haven't heard this term, I think you're drawing influence from airplanes. They have these black boxes and it's basically
Right.
recording everything. Once a
Right.
plane crashes, has some kind of issue, then people can find this thing that's, I think, kind of indestructible. I don't know, fact check me. And they're able to go back and listen to what kind of conversation was happening in I don't even know what that area is called, but where the pilots are saying, yes. So from there, I can have a bit of an idea of what you're talking about to look back into the black box of a relationship. Could you expand more on that?
Yeah, I think this is an important piece. It's a huge piece I think people miss because when they're quote unquote getting over a relationship, they don't revisit it. They don't want to go back. They don't want to think about the relationship. They just want to move forward.
Especially their part, right?
Yeah. And so there sometimes isn't a lot of ownership. So what didn't work, what their contribution was to the expiration of this relationship just rolls over like cell phone minutes into the next relationship, right? So examining the black box means to once you have some distance and you're not so emotionally, once your lenses are more clear, then you could examine. It's not so much about blaming the other person. It's what did I do? How did I show up? What were my patterns? And what was my contribution to this ending? And I think that's gold, so it's really hard to look at because then you take that into the therapy room or wherever you want and you start processing and then you understand more about self through that. And then once you understand more about yourself, now you're going into something new with that awareness. And so that I think changes, that will give you a new love experience. It sets you up for something different.
I'm thinking like if you have been or are the dumpee, I imagine like you're kind of primed to think about this a little bit more. Like they broke up with me because of maybe something I did. So maybe people that are on that side of it are thinking about it without knowing, the concept of going back to the black box. But the people that did the dumping, the person that ended the relationship, especially in those situations, which I think is fairly common, the other person feels blindsided. I had no idea this was coming. Like, where is this coming from? What would you say to the person doing the dumping? Like, or not rather, what would you say to them, but what are your thoughts on how people that do that generally think of the black box? Like, do you find that they're also thinking about what I've done, or is it takes them a little bit longer to get there? Or
I mean, as somebody who was the one that did the walking away, I think first and foremost, we've got to really get rid of this kind of idea that we have that the person doing the walking away is the bad guy or the dumper is the bad guy, right? That's not always the case. And sometimes it's actually harder to be the one that walks away than it is to be the one that got walked away from. right? Especially if on the outside things look good, or, like, what do you mean? Like, it was a pretty decent relationship, but like, the person just wasn't feeling like this was the right connection for them, or it just wasn't meeting their needs in the way that they really desired this partnership to meet. There's something wrong with this person. They're a good person. It's just not for me. They're not for me. And so I think we have to give a little credit sometimes. And I really like to quote, there's no such thing as one-way liberation. This idea of there's no such thing as one-way liberation is really, really important, because even if you're the person on the receiving end of the dumping, right? If this person walked away from you, they in essence kind of did you a favor too, because clearly they felt that this was not the right partnership for whatever reason, right? And do you want to be in relationship with somebody who doesn't feel the way about you that you might feel about them, right? And so I really go back to that thought a lot when I think about the people that are doing the walking away. That's just
Sometimes
my
it's a
thought.
gift. A lot of people don't have the courage or ability to end a relationship. Many of us are in relationships for way too long. And
Mhm.
so when someone does the dumping,
Yeah.
they're letting you free,
Yeah.
even if it doesn't feel like it, you know. My divorce was the greatest repositioning in my life, and without that, none of my books would have happened. None of my whole career would have happened.
And she's the one that left,
And
right?
she's the one that
Yeah.
left. And if she didn't
Mhm.
leave, I wouldn't have left, you know?
Right.
So she's the reason why I ran toward my true north.
Right.
So I'm able to see now that it was a gift. Back then it was a curse, but you know, that's why it creates, you need distance.
And also this idea of being the one that, leaves and then looking at the black box, to kind of go back to that part of the question. I think that as the one that left, I was examining the black box for a year leading up to actually ending it, right? Because
Mhm.
I think part of my journey, but also in my experience with people who have done the leaving, is that we are really examining ourselves prior to doing the walking away. Like, is this really what I should be doing? Is this really what I want? Like, why do I feel this way? And so for me personally, and again, with a lot of my clients, there's lots of therapy leading up to the leaving. There's lots of beating myself up. There's lots of owning my part. There's lots of trying to, look at things through different lenses. And so I think that actually sometimes when you've done the leaving, you've been examining it for a while before doing it. I think very rarely is it somebody just wakes up on a whim and is like, I think I'm going to end my relationship today.
Right, right.
There's a lot of thought that goes into it.
Yeah, generally lots of hemming and hawing.
Mhm.
I think a lot of people listening to this would resonate. And even just this conversation in itself, I love this thing of getting away from the idea that somebody that walks away is the bad guy.
Right.
And even John, your real life example of you are where you are because of what happened here,
Mhm.
and her walking away wasn't necessarily because any malice or ill intention, anything like that. It's like, I would think that she and anybody walking away is recognizing this isn't right for me, and it's not right for you, and it's not right for us. I think the idea, hopefully, when people get married or enter a long-term relationship and some kind of commitment, is that it's like these two paths that have converged. And now, like it or not, you kind of are on one path and you figure out a lot of things together. And if it's not ending up that way, that you keep getting further and further away from each other, sometimes that decision to make can be difficult. You said, John, like, if she hadn't done that, you wouldn't have walked away. You would have stayed there.
Mhm.
And I think that speaks to maybe your observations that people do that. You said people stay in relationships too long. And what are some of the things that you've observed that happen when people choose to stay for too long, or maybe they're not choosing, but they're passively living
Yeah,
that way?
Just going along with it. Yeah.
the big
Yeah.
one is growth being stunted.
Mm.
So you know, you're also taking a hostage, right? You're also
Yes.
if both people are not happy and thriving in their relationship and they're not getting things from it, then your refusal to leave is also causing the growth to be stunted, not only for yourself but your partner, right? So that's happening. Possibly anger, resentment.
Mhm.
You know, you have these relationships. This is more our parents, but yeah, they've been together for 50 years, but they've been sleeping in the
They
separate.
hate each other.
Yeah, they hate each other and they sleep in separate bedrooms for the last 30, and they
Yeah.
haven't, you know, held hands. And quality of life.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know about you, but love is a huge part of my life. I mean, it's something that we're on this planet one time. I want to love hard, and I want to love, you know, in a healthy way. And I want love to teach me things. And so when people don't want to be together, it unplugs it, you know?
Mm.
And so then there isn't teaching. There's just a lot of white knuckles and eggshells and, you know.
Thinking of, like, vows. We've all been to many weddings, I'm sure,
Yeah.
and people exchanging these really loving, kind words of intention. And one of you said, now I can't remember who said it, so thank you for saying it, that we generally don't enter relationships intending for things to go south or intending for us to get divorced. What I'm hearing though is like a challenge to the idea that this commitment really is forever. The commitment is forever for us to keep trying until it doesn't work anymore, but that doesn't sound very good in vows.
Yeah,
So
I think we put as a society way too much weight on the promise because it sells chocolates and it's romantic and all that, but it's not realistic. So I think we shouldn't say happily ever after or you're mine forever or you complete me. Like all those things are damaging, you know. I love you today. You know,
I choose to love you
I
today.
choose to love you today. This ring is a marker for what we built so far. It's how I feel about you. It's a measure of the here and now. It's not handcuffs. It's not an anchor for you to be with me forever.
Yeah. It's hope too. You know, I mean, people love the idea of hope, and I think that's beautiful. But I also think that it can be a way to hide. You know, I also think that in our society, especially for women, but I think for everybody, you know, we've really been taught that being chosen is where we get our self-worth, right? We are less than if we're not partnered. And especially for women, it's about being chosen to be somebody's partner. Right. And so we really measure our self-worth on whether or not these relationships are forever or not. We're not measuring it on whether or not I'm in a healthy, vibrant, you know, relationship that fulfills me and challenges me in all the great ways and I'm growing. We measure it on a time, right? So going back to what you were saying about somebody's been together for 50 years. And, you know, I started saying like, I am no longer celebrating that anymore. I will celebrate your 50-year anniversary if you guys are still in what I was just talking about, that kind of relationship, but I'm not celebrating it just for the sake of time because I don't look at that as an accomplishment, right? Like, I think the accomplishment is, are we still growing and are we still are we still on the same page? I would actually rather, and it's funny, I just saw a couple of weeks ago, I drove by a woman's car who, you know, people tag their cars just married with like the soap in the window and the streamers and all these things. This woman's whole car was decked out in just divorced. And I thought that is something I want to celebrate. It's not that I'm celebrating divorce. It's that I'm celebrating you made the best decision, you know, most likely, I don't know this person, but it's like, let's start celebrating choosing yourself or choosing the best for both of you when it no longer makes sense and doesn't fulfill you all in that kind of way. Right. Because to John's point, we only live life once. So I don't want to live this life
on this planet.
Yeah.
As
on
far
this
as
planet
we know.
or in this body. Right. But yeah, I would much rather celebrate. I made the best decision for me and I'm choosing happiness and growth versus 50 years of stagnation and misery, you know?
yeah. I mean, I can't help but feel like this is a challenge to something that's been established for thousands of years in the history of humanity across different cultures. And what I'm hearing, and I would love to hear more about, is just the permission that people don't always feel like they have to choose themselves. So thank you for speaking in this way openly. Like, I think if many of us were to enter relationships thinking in this way, then some kind of breakup or some kind of divorce may not actually be as contentious as the ones that we have seen.
Totally.
I mean, this is kind of an interesting question that came up, like for divorces that you have observed that aren't contentious, that are truly amicable, what kind of characteristics or traits of that dynamic do you think are key in order to having a smooth transition out of a marriage?
Ooh. I mean, I can think of three. One that's the closest to me, which is my best friend, and they have the most loving partnership as exes, and they co-parent, right? So they had to obviously stay in each other's lives. And I think there's so many tenets that they've held themselves accountable to in their relationship as it's evolved. The first and foremost was they ended it before they hated each other, right? They were really in this place of, I still love you. Let's be in the knowing together. And they did couples therapy and they had a lot of revelations. And it's not that it was an easy decision to make, but it was very much like there is still love here. So let's call this while that love is still here before we get to the place of hating each other. Right. So that was number one. I think number two, it was very much like the love doesn't go away. You were my best friend and that doesn't change. Right. So they really revere each other for being the friend that they were, even when they were romantic. The romantic piece has changed. The friendship piece has not. And they're very protective of the relationship and of the other person. So that goes for, protecting each other from the outside from what people have to say. People want to put it in a box. They want you to be angry with that person, because then it'll make more sense for them why you guys got divorced or why you guys split up, right? And so I see both of them really defending the other person to the people in their lives. Like, no, we're not going to go there. I'm not going to shit talk this person. I'm not going to degrade them. They're amazing. They're an amazing partner. They're an amazing parent, whatever that is. And so really protecting each other just like they would if they were still romantically involved, right? So just the protection of the love, the protection of the relationship, I think is so important. And I'm constantly in awe of the way that they're able to show up. They fight, of course, they bicker, of course, just like friends would, by the way, but they're just so precious with the relationship. And I just think that's so beautiful. And I think their son is really benefiting from it in every way possible.
Yeah.
You know, the word that comes to my mind is respect.
Totally.
Me too. I swear, I was thinking that too. It's like,
Respectful.
oh, they still respect each other.
Yes.
They ended it before they didn't.
Yep,
When we go through
exactly.
breakups, respect goes out the window.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
That's why we start shit talking people and hating and all. And
Because I think we
wanting
hold
worse.
on, right? We hold on for too long. We hold on to the place of, I don't respect you and I hate you, so now I can leave. And again, it's especially as people have children, like you're going to be connected to this person forever and ever. Amen. Right. So do you want to be in that kind of hateful relationship with somebody? And they really consciously decided, no, we don't want to do that. You know?
Yeah. Do you want to model for your kids, like, this is what marriages are supposed to look like, hating each other?
Exactly.
Yeah. So we spent a lot of time talking about breakups. And I think it's because I have had so much focus on this with my clients. Like, it's just something that people come to therapy with. We don't often have clients coming to us like, my relationship is amazing. Let's have a session today. I mean, it happens sometimes, not as common, but I do want to talk about relationships too, and being in them and the beauty of them, and not really intending to break up all the time. But my understanding in the work that you do and some of the things that you've written together, there's different types of partners in relationships. I think you kind of alluded to some of these things with words that you've used to describe people in relationships. Like something that I know that you've talked about is over and under functioning. So I was hoping you could expand on that and some of the other concepts that come with just different types of partners, people that enter together into a commitment.
Every relationship has a dynamic, and there's different types of dynamics. And so one that we talk about is over functioning and under functioning. So she could expand on that. I think she's more qualified
As the overfunctioner.
as the overfunctioner. If I expand, she's going to have a lot of anxiety.
That's not true. You know, overfunctioning, underfunctioning is definitely something that I think actually Brene Brown really brought into the forefront of like it being common vernacular within this world. And really the way that we look at it is it's the way that somebody responds to anxiety, right? So when all of us get anxious, we respond in different ways. And for some people, they underfunction, which means they really pull inward, they stop functioning, they kind of give up the reins, they kind of fall into the background, right? And that is really based on a deep belief that they can't function, they can't do it right, they're not equipped, right? And so they're kind of acting out of that deep-seated belief. And then other people on the other side of the spectrum, when feeling anxious, overfunction, they control, they put things in boxes, they take care of things, they're the ones that round everybody up and make things happen, and they're action oriented. And in a lot of ways that comes from a deep-seated belief that loss of control is scary, that they're the only ones that they can rely on, right? Because that's been proven to them throughout their lives. And so they fall into that belief, right? And then the action kind of ensues from there. And so these kind of dynamics don't just show up in childhood. Obviously, they carry into our partnerships. And for a lot of us, we are attracted to the quote unquote opposite, right? So whether that's in attachment styles, whether that's in under over functioning, we tend to be drawn to what's different. And so
I think the over functioner finds her cape with an under functioner
yes,
until they
totally.
realize that they don't want to do this anymore. And then of course it's not a cape. It's kryptonite. But and then the under functioner like me, who grew up not doing any chores, any laundry, the youngest, very taken care of. My brother was forced to go to work with my parents, and I got to go outside and play, right? That was me. And so the under functioner is used to being taken care of. And so that dynamic can be attractive in the beginning until people realize that this is repeating an unhealthy pattern.
And it's parentified, right? And so what usually ends up happening is, especially with under and over functioning, it starts to take on a parental kind of vibe, right? So the overfunctioner feels like the parent, the underfunctioner feels like the kid. And for both parties, that's not attractive, right? Because we're not meant to sleep with our offspring. And so it really starts to kill eros. But I see this happen so often unconsciously in partnerships. And so John and I really tackled it. We tried, at least, and continue to try in a very conscious way, because we know the outcome of it. We see what happens to our relationship when we kind of allow ourselves to be in those dynamics. And listen, it's what feels natural for us. So we fall back into it consistently to talk about it. And then we have to bring it out again and put it on the table and inspect it and own our part. And what can I do to change this? Right. It doesn't necessarily go away.
Yeah. But what's a great sign is because when you work on this and you really kind of change from the inside out, what you used to be attracted to kind of repels you.
Totally.
So if what I was, being taken care of used to be attractive to me, but now it could feel smothering.
Yep.
It could be activating for me, because if I start to see her like my mom, it's a total turn off, right? When it used to be a turn on. So it's actually proof that people are growing, is what you used to be attracted to now kind of repels you.
You
And
mentioned
so her taking care of me might
Yeah.
have been what she, as a comfort and familiar, but now it would probably make her resentful and angry.
I think it always made me resentful and angry. I just didn't think I had the consciousness of the words to put to it,
I'm hearing, and I can also just think back in my own life, think about the things that my clients have talked about, like what we think we feel is the most important thing early on in a relationship may not end up being something that's sustainable or a dynamic that lasts forever. And you mentioned that like you have these natural tendencies, or it's in your nature to over or under function, but you're consciously working at it. And you said that this is something that you bring to the table regularly between each other. Top 2 tips for people out there that are struggling to figure out how to, like, I'm not your mother. Like, how do people get out of that?
You want to speak to that? You want me to speak to that?
I think for me, self-inventory. What are the patterns? What am I doing? I mean, not to be generic, but communicating with each other. I wouldn't know that she has a problem unless she starts to express it, right? So instead of mind reading, actually us talking to each other and saying, hey, I feel like I'm over functioning. I feel like I'm, being your mom. Or I might feel like, hey, I think you're nagging and, whatever.
Communicate.
I can go eat the cheeseburger. Don't shame me.
I regularly, and I say this in the book too, and I do feel like this is a little bit of a hot button topic because people have kind of pushed back on it. But if you're the over functioner in the dynamic, usually the change has to start with you. Meaning most under functioners, at least if we're coming at it unconsciously, right? Like we're not talking about John, who's like super aware of his patterns and has obviously done a ton of work and all these things, but typically, if you're under functioning in a relationship, you're not going to be the one. And I say typically, not all the time, you're not going to be the one that stops it, right? Because you're getting taken care of. And so a lot of times,
well, you're also not the one angry.
You're not the one angry, and you're the one that's getting all the things taken care of for you, right? And so a lot of times it's the over functioners who are walking around with the anger and the resentment and the feeling like they're doing all the things and they're not getting it in return. And so one more thing, over functioners, to put on your plate, you got to be the one to stop it, right? And so you can stop that dynamic in a lot of ways, but communication, to John's point, is one of the biggest components, because you can't just do it in a way that's passive aggressive or that's or just outright aggressive, right? Because that's not the healthy way to address it. You are also responsible for this dynamic, right? We like to put a lot of the blame on the underfunctioners as the overfunctioner, but that's not what we're doing here. It's all about taking your 100%, right? Owning that part. And so you are just as responsible for this dynamic as they are. What you can do is communicate, here's what I've noticed about myself. Here's where I see that I do this thing and that it leads to resentment. I don't want to resent you or anybody for that matter in my partnership. And so in order to start to do work on that, I'm going to stop doing X, Y, and Z, or I'm going to start doing X, Y, and Z, right? I'm going to start focusing more on myself and my own self-care, for example. And then you let whatever response comes up be the response that comes up, and you don't try to micromanage their response, which is pretty typical for an overfunctioner to also try to do, right?
Yeah. And some of the things you're saying to describe what happens with an overfunctioner, their internal process, is reminding me of another hot topic that we hear about in therapy and mental health all the time, relationships, codependency. And would love to hear your thoughts around how does codependency play a part for overfunctioners specifically, but just in any relationship. And how does somebody get out of this kind of dynamic?
I mean, codependency is kind of like the flag that I wave for sure. I like to kind of describe it in the most simple way and just say codependency is strictly if you're good, I'm good. If you're not good, I'm not good. Right. So my emotional state is based on somebody else. It's external.
Mhm.
Right. And so a lot of times overfunctioners are running around trying to manage and mitigate people feeling any kind of way, right? Like I got to control it all. I can't rock the boat. I have to manage the situation emotionally, right? And we do that for our own safety because again, we believe that control is going to somehow provide us with safety and stability, right? Which is an illusion. And so as the overfunctioner, a lot of it is allowing people to feel however they're going to feel, right? It is stepping back and taking my hands out of the constant need to kind of manipulate and control situations and rather start paying attention to myself and the way that I show up in the dynamic. What are the things that I'm doing that are controlling, that are manipulating, that are enabling, right? Like I'm enabling the underfunctioning, for example. And I got to look at myself, right? This isn't about blaming the other person.
Also, I got to say there is a spectrum. So if Vanessa is in the hospital because we just discovered she has cancer, she's not good. And it's totally okay for me to not be good for a
Of
while.
course,
Right.
right.
So we're not talking about that. We're talking about more day to day. We're talking about enmeshment. We're talking
Mhm.
about my worth, my quality of life, my state being tied to hers and vice versa. So one jacuzzi, not two bathtubs, separate bathtubs, if that makes sense.
That image without the actual image is a little confusing.
So the world thinks love is one jacuzzi, people sitting on top of each other, perhaps facing each other. That's love. That's sexy. And I saw this yogurt ad years ago, and I thought, oh, this is healthy love. And it was two people sitting in two different bathtubs. At the Grand Canyon, like they've come a long way, and the only thing connecting them was they were holding hands, and it was, and they were facing the same direction, right? So they're looking out in the world, and I just thought it was such a great advertisement for, or a visual for a healthy relationship.
Codependency. Yeah, we hear about it in relationships, romantic ones, but also with parents. So a lot of what you said like could be totally
Children,
applied in those.
friends, work, it shows
Mhm.
up everywhere. Because once a codependent, always a codependent. You're not just codependent in your romantic relationship.
Right.
Most likely, if you've got some of these behaviors, it's showing up across the board.
Yeah. It is interesting how one can feel so seen and attacked at the same time. So
Welcome to codependency world.
yes. Well, thank you so much for this great conversation. Is there anything else that you want to add? Just like top words of wisdom or additional insights, or maybe just things you have on the way, places that people can find you?
I just want to add or remind people that relationships, love, dating, it's just all of it is hard, you know. And there is, you know, no like paint by numbers. If you do this and this, it's all a journey. It's always exploring. And, you know, I think it's meant to be tough because what of value in life isn't tough, right? So I just want to let people know, if you're watching and you're struggling in your relationship or your relationship with self, that yeah, it's hard. It's hard.
Yeah. And then we're
Yeah.
all in it together.
Yeah.
Right. There's support in the collective, I suppose, knowing that we're all in this journey together. Knowing that, you know, we're all just bozos on the bus, right? We're all doing our best. And very rarely is somebody coming from this in a very like calculative, mean spirited way, right? Like we are all struggling and doing the best with what we can. And I think that's important to be able to see each other in that light and to just help us. I keep saying own our part, but it goes back to that, right? I really am very much in this realm of radical responsibility. And, you know, you're not responsible for your wounds, but you're responsible for the healing of your wounds, right? And kind of owning that part. But I mean, as far as where we can find
Yeah. Do
each
you want
other,
to give them our home address?
yeah, you would do that, wouldn't you?
I have.
We
So
so
pop
our
over for
book
dinner
is,
sometime.
I know, right? Come on, meet us out here in LA. It's Not Me, It's You is our book that we wrote together. You can find me, I'm mostly on Instagram, Vanessa S. Bennett. Also TikTok as the Coda Yoda, if you want to do more codependency work there.
Mm.
What about you?
I'm just the angry therapist.
I'm just the angry
across the
therapist.
board. Yeah, at the angry therapist.
And then Angry Therapist podcast, and mine's called Cheaper Than Therapy.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for your time, energy, wisdom. Hope everybody out there has a great rest of their week.
Yeah, be well.